Oh, yo, what's up, internet? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Today, we are picking up loosely where we left off for last week's video, which was about religious trauma in Baldur's Gate 3. If you want to check out my thoughts on the world building and the community and the cult of the absolute, you can go check out that video. This video is specifically more of the character case studies, the breakdown on which character is the one that everyone thinks is a great depiction of religious trauma and which one do I think is the better depiction of religious trauma. Religious trauma is one of my specialties, and so we're going to focus there. I'll probably talk a little bit about neurodivergent people too, because that's one of my other specialties. Surprisingly, they go hand in hand. So yeah, if you want to check out the bigger video, why I like role-playing games and how they can be healing, etc., go check that out. This one, we're going to do the characters. I think the best characters when it comes to the topic of religious trauma in Baldur's Gate 3 are obviously Shadowheart and Lae'zel, although I think Will and Gale also have aspects of like coercive control. Gale is the weakest case, so I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with the easy ones and work my way up to the complex ones. Gale dates and bangs and breaks up with, and depending on how you play, tries to either get back with and or overthrow a goddess. And so, I don't really necessarily view Gale's story arc as one of religious trauma outside of the fact that Mistra would be worshipped as a deity. But his character arc is far more about relationships. And also, I don't know, I didn't play the game when it first came out, right? So I know it's been patched. We're on like patch 8 or whatever. But Gale's also the character who throws himself at the most characters. Every playthrough, Gale is like, bruh, obviously we're romancing Karlach. Leave me alone. That's how I play the game. That's not true. Minthara is the correct answer for a romance option. But the love angle with Gale is, again, like more about messy relationship. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Do I have thoughts on Gale's relationship with Mistra? You bet. But I've not done a Gale origin run. I don't like necessarily playing as wizards. Keeping track of spell slots is easy in Baldur's Gate 3, but in my world, in the real world of D&D, wizards are complicated because I can never remember how many spell slots and at what level. Blah, 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 blah. Classic ADHDer. I am playing as a warlock in real life right now, and that's hard enough to keep track of the spell slots. And yeah, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite mechanism in Baldur's Gate 3. Everybody loves a good fireball. I understand. Me too. But so yeah, Gale definitely has aspects of like coercive control in the relationship. The entire relationship he has with the goddess is one of power imbalance. And whenever there's a power imbalance, there's the potential for abuse, right? Now, Gale, again, for role-playing reasons and how the origin story plays out, I've never done a Gale origin run, but having Gale in my party and completing aspects of his story, I generally go for sort of the god of ambition route where he gets to be his own god. He ascends and comes back at the party as like the shiny silver version of himself. Again, I played 4 times, had different endings. In my Dark Urge run, it just bit off Gale's hand or ripped it off. I don't remember. You could do something with Gale's hand. And if you keep it, then you can use it to get into the murder tribunal. It's a whole thing. I had the most fun playing Dark Urge. So one of my runs, Gale wasn't even in my party ever. I think my first, this is my 4th run, and I guess I've only had Gale finish 1 run with me. Because again, like I think it's kind of funny that you can just not save him early in the game, or as a Dark Urge, you can just rip his hand off. So I've never pursued like Gale getting back with Mistra from what I've read online. And it's like, again, I'm not averse to spoilers. Spoilers, if you're 5 minutes into the video, yikes. But this is a game that's, I don't know, however many years old, 5. So I don't know. Get with it, gang. I got to it several years after it was popular. So yeah, there's just like an element of coercive control, not in a cult setting beyond that he's dating a god. I don't know. It's weird. Um, and again, Gale's desire to be a god himself is not really one to be worshipped. This isn't sort of uh, the jealous Old Testament god or Odin or some other deity that requires worship to function. This is Gale's truly like invested, sort of megalomaniacally, you know, you guys know what I mean. Um, and it's really just about ambition. Like he is interested in how far he can take his ability more than he requires companionship. Not companionship, because again, he's like the thirstiest of thirsty origin characters. But I think he, again, is not doing it for like strictly religious reasons. So I really, based on my playthroughs and what I've read of his character online, seen him as a messy relationship. That relationship between him and his goddess fuck buddy are relationship dynamics. You know, there's a dramatic relationship more than it is a religious issue. Certainly the power imbalance is there. That would sort of be like, I don't know, there's not a good example because gods aren't real, right? But I was going to say, if somebody was trying to marry the Pope, but the Pope is famously propagandistically celibate. This Pope, I don't doubt, is celibate. Because who sleeps with people from Illinois? That's a Midwest joke. It's fine if you didn't get it or if you didn't like it. It was in poor taste. I'm from Wisconsin and we don't like people from Illinois. I don't think he spent most of his time in Illinois. I don't know. I'm not a Catholic. I don't think Catholics know either. That's the fun thing about Catholics. So anyway, yeah, like by and large, if you were to think of dating someone or marrying somebody or hooking up with somebody who had a high degree of control, like we'd look at sort of the messiness of like Henry VIII might be a more realistic example than like if somebody was trying to get with the Pope or other cult leaders, right? Like they end up reinventing polygamy, shockingly, men in charge. And so Baldur's Gate 3 flips that on its head a little bit because, again, Mistra is the one who's in charge and holds way more power than Gale. And it's not a good relationship, but like he's not a good partner either. It's a messy, dramatic relationship in the sense that they're both messy, more so than it is like, ew, poor guy, she really abused him. Now, again, maybe there's a storyline where she's awful and she's the bad guy and he's the hero. He's just, in every playthrough of mine, sort of played the same role where he's sort of on my bench unless I really need him. And also, I bit his hand off in one playthrough. But like to complete his story is fun. I am a dog person more than a cat person, so having his origin run just so I can have a cat in my camp is less important to me than having Scratch all the time. So, you know, that's my bias, and I'll own that. So I think Gale could be framed as religious trauma, but I think it is the weakest case study of religious trauma. Will, a bit more. And again, religion loosely, right? Because there are people who would worship devils in Faerun, but Will's not really one of them. Will sort of is more of like, he signs a bad contract, right? Like Will is put into a bad position based on his family name, and then to sort of individuate, it would be like he would join a cult, right? And instead of joining a cult, he signs a contract. He gets all these powers. He becomes a devil himself, yada, yada, yada. I have read online that Will's origin playthrough varies from person to person, but is more fun. He's a more fun origin character than he is as a party member because it feels far more personal in Act 3 when you actually get back to Baldur's Gate and people know him and recognize him and remember him, and you get a lot more of the story beats that don't necessarily change his overall character arc, but are far more personal. Um, so that might be interesting. Again, I'm playing a warlock in my real life campaign, and so doing a Gale or a Will origin run might be fun. I like the warlock class. Um, it certainly does devolve into just eldritch blasting everything. I like the idea of Will as sort of this swashbuckling adventurer, and so if I were to do an origin run with him, it'd probably be more of multi-classing. But for the role playing perspective of seeing that, and I don't know if the game was invented to have Will end up with Karlach, or that's just a common way that people play it. That's not how I played Karlach in my origin run at all. She and Lae'zel were the saddest ending in the game, I'm gonna say. But so like I think for role playing purposes that might be interesting, but Will's beyond coercive control. Will is really in an abusive relationship because of his contracts, where again his partner makes him get a tattoo with her name, and also like drives him away from his parents and isolates him, right? Like that's the real world analogy there. She gives him horns in the game and sometimes kills his dad, but all the time threatens to at least do that. And so, like it's messy there. Again, it veers a little less religious. This isn't Will's honoring the religion of his childhood so much as he's in an abusive relationship. There is a big power imbalance. He is with, like, again, a deity is involved. Mizora as a devil having his contract, but also like she's an underling to a greater deity of evil import. So like there's levels there, I guess. Having Mizora in camp, like some of the like camp companions you get that are not playable always felt odd to me. Like I got excited when Mizora was in my camp. Like, would I play as the evil devil character? Absolutely. But as far as I know, you can't do that. And I've only broken Oath Paladin, where then you get that guy too. And what's his name? Scleratus or whatever, his little sniveling tiny hobgoblin guy you get that you murder a bunch of times. If you're so inclined, you can Dark Urge however you would like. But yeah, you end up with these sort of like odd, whatever. Mizora again would be like a more interesting character to flesh out. I think again, full disclosure, transparency, did not play Baldur's Gate or Baldur's Gate 2. And while I'm familiar with sort of Faerun from like the Forgotten Realms books, I am late to D&D in my life as well. So maybe she is fleshed out and I just don't know it. So yeah, I have less to say about Will there as well, other than, again, I think as the son of a leader also has some interesting things. I grew up in a fundamentalist high control religion, and my parents were not religious leaders. My parents were teachers, but they were like, again, respected elders to the point where I'd say my dad was fairly well known. And both my parents were teachers at the high school I went to. And so again, like there is a lot of pressure when your parent is in leadership role. Some kids really recoil against that. There's this trope of like pastors' kids. PKs tend to either become pastors themselves or like are the black sheep of the family, the rebellious ones. And so oftentimes it is because of that added level of pressure. And so again, Will sort of doing this evil, negative, ethically gray sort of thing to individuate himself makes sense developmentally, not necessarily if you're playing him as like a goody two shoes. But again, I think that gives the character a lot of richness and a lot of depth, and that opens up role playing ways. I don't know what like an evil or maybe like a lawful evil run for him would look like. As far as I know, and feel free to be keyboard correctors and drop down in the comments, but as far as I know, Dark Urge is the one that's like easiest to get an evil playthrough. Not that you can't do evil runs for other people, but I think like the game is definitely coded to be good, more so than evil. There were some role-playing dead ends even in Dark Urge, because there's just some things that like require you to complete quests being sort of good. So I don't know that Dark Urge is religious. I guess Dark Urge would be religious drama. I haven't prepped that. I'm just thinking through it in real time. My Dark Urge run was my favorite playthrough by far. Sided with the goblins in Act 1, attacked the Grove, romanced Minthara, and really planned to lead the world with her. And only at the end of the game did I then murder her when that became an option. That, like, again, for role-playing reasons, I thought was fantastic. I did not turn on my father, my deity. I followed him. And again, like, the Dark Urge run ending evilly is like thematically very fun. I'm the type of person who like will play an 8-hour board game and then everyone dies at the end, and I'm thrilled because I think that's how it works. Not even in like a morbid way, just in a like, I've played King of Tokyo, which is like a children's game. And one time, my favorite time playing the game is I drew a card where everyone took like 4 damage and everyone died. And it was my favorite time I've ever played King of Tokyo, when all the monsters died. So I'm just sort of like, I don't know. I think that's I don't want to say a good ending, because again, a lot of times it's done very poorly. But in service of the god of murder, yeah, as a great ending to have just seas of red and piles of bones and me by myself at the end of the world was a really rewarding ending. I did think, because Scleratus was like, of course you need a mate because we need more offspring, I thought you would get to rule with someone. And then Minthara was the first person I murdered in the end game, which took me by surprise. I mean, I clicked the button, but I was surprised it was an option. And then you throw the rest of your party off a Nautiloid, and then you just murder everyone. And like, again, that's not great from like a good and evil perspective. But if you're trying to play a game evilly, it's a very rewarding ending. I never really felt compelled by my religion. Again, part of the Dark Urge, because you can play it either as leaning into the evil or resisting the evil, does give you a lot of role-playing options. And I didn't do like a resist run. I was like, let's see how evil you can be, other than like no harm to animals, for, again, my own personal ethics, in spite of role-playing. Not gonna hurt scratch. Or the owlbear. It's great fun to have the owlbear at the end of the game. So yeah, I could see how that could be some like coercive control, but in sort of like a nihilistic sense, almost more of like, drinking the flavor aid and Jonestowning it, like a cult following where everyone dies because then we get the afterlife. Although I do think sort of the warmongering of Christian nationalists and like being okay with global warming, like, again, my parents are fundamentalists. And so like climate change is of great concern to me because I care about the world's, but also like future generations. I have children, and not just my own children, but anybody's children. So I care about future generations. But that's the thing I think about on a daily basis because of my children. And, the idea that like climate change is, the atmosphere will burn up and then the Bible will come true because the prophecy is, Armageddon by rain of fire. Like, yeah, that is the death cult. You don't get to be like, we're moral high ground, good for us, we're the good people, if you're like doing the world ends with pools of blood and mountains of skulls. Again, narratively, my evil run was very rewarding, but like, was evil. Dark Urge isn't the good guy at the end of an evil run. He's the worst. So I can see some death cult dynamics there, but that was the most fun I had playing, for sure. And I feel this way about Star Wars too. If you go evil, you get a much better playthrough. If you go evil, you get more powers. Shadowheart, much better by taking over the cult of Shar instead of turning away. So many cool powers, better weapons. again, like for the playing of the game, making the character stronger, Ascended Astarion, so much fun, right? Way cooler. It just is. Dark Urge is fun because the Dark Urge character gets a lot of cool stuff. I will say Broken Oath Paladin was lamer than Keeping Your Oath. So I didn't love that. And I broke my oath on accident. How did I break my oath? I killed the special interest group. I forget his name because I'm in Act 1 right now, again, in a new playthrough. But the people who try to buy the Githyanki egg, I killed them in Act 3, not realizing that would make me break my oath. So I'm not sure. I was not entirely clear on when or how I broke my oath. Like, when is that? I guess they're not. They weren't evil for trying to buy the egg, but you're not really punished in Act 1 for killing the person who tries to buy the egg. So I don't know. I was confused about that. And that was, again, like Minthara was a party member, not my main character. So only have that experience of a Paladin Oathbreaker. Paladin does seem like super overpowered in that game. If not, again, having Minthara as my party, and I didn't reclass her, so she's Paladin. Yeah. I could do a whole thing on like Lolth, but I don't know. Go read the R.A. Salvatore books, I guess. She's not really in the game other than you can convince some spiders to like leave you alone if they go follow Lolth instead of following the Dwagar who's raised them. It's fine. Let's talk Shadowheart and Lae'zel. Shadowheart is obviously a story about religious trauma and cult dynamics. Fairly textbook. And the reason I think she's not the best depiction of religious trauma is because of how she plays as a character more than like, I think because of game mechanics more so than what her actual story is. So do I think she is textbook religious trauma? Yeah, absolutely. Down to like complex PTSD and having like repressed memories. Now, talking about how the human brain works in psychology is different than a god going about and meddling in your memory, right? Like there's an element of fantasy in a role-playing game. So it's not one-to-one textbook, but yeah, like she has repressed memories. She's raised in a cult, taken away from her family at a young age, constant trials of designed to make her feel more loyal to the cult. She has this chip on her shoulder when you first meet her and a secrecy around her worship of Shar because as the Shar worshiper, she has been ostracized and judged by other people. And if you don't judge her for it, her approval of you grows. And again, like think about JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, or Mormons, any religion that sends people out on sort of missionary work. Those people who are coming door to door are not designed to get new converts. Going door to door and doing missionary work is all about having the door slammed in your face over and over and over again. It lets you know that the world at large is not a welcoming or loving place, but your religion of choice, your cults, your home base loves you. And so you get rejection, and then you get to return to this place that loves you. That's very powerful. And that trauma bond that can happen there, that is designed to happen there, is really powerful, and that can create loyalty for somebody's entire life, right? Like Mormon missionaries go out while their brains are still developing and then come back and are in the church for the rest of their lives. Like that's very on purpose, very intentional. A lot of college campuses will send people on missionary trips because of that, right? You go to this country where you don't speak the language and you are not like welcomed, or if you are, you're still ostracized because you don't speak the language or you don't know the culture. And so there's also like a ton of colonizer vibes to missionary work, but like sort of the classic Mormon idea of like getting the door slammed into your face over and over and over again, and then getting to go home to your cult who loves you. That's the power. It's not about getting new converts. It's about strengthening the loyalty. And so we see that with Shar over and over again. She's the lady of loss. And so having bad things happen strengthens your faith. And I was raised fundamentalist evangelical. And so again, like anything good that happens is from God. All the bad things that happen are your own fault, your own personal failing. Like that's a entity, that's a deity that cannot be falsified. There's no way for that god to fail, because the system in place is, if it's error, it's sin or doubt or your own personal failing, and anything good is not from your own autonomy or willpower or drive. It's all about blessings from your chosen deity. And so Shar's gross. Certainly messing with people's memory is gross. There are cult tactics that will do that. Staying up super late at night, using drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, whether it's the heavier stuff. We certainly can see that in different elements of coercive control. You can see that in other industries as well, in like the pornography industry, high level drug use, some of that stuff for coercing people. And yeah, like that's a problem. But I think, again, without getting into like Netflix documentary cults, where do we see this in everyday run of the mill Christianity and other mainstream religions? We see it in like camps that kids and teens go on, and they keep them up all night, right? 24-hour pray-a-thons, stay away camp type stuff, where you're in this heightened sense of emotional vulnerability. You're outside of your normal environment. You don't have your people around you. You're meeting a ton of new people. Then we're staying up late. We're singing Kumbaya around the fireplace. Maybe we're sugared up. Maybe we're having drugs, whatever it is. And like, our brains are very susceptible to things then, right? And so coercive control can happen in those types of things. And so Shadowheart has elements of that, again, depending on how you role play her and how you sort of get that. You get glimpses into her early training where she's questioning things. You can find that sort of hidden grove with the night orchids and her notes. That one person who remembers her. Again, the reason I think it falls short is because I thought playing her as an evil run was more fun. For playing her as a character, she gets like the shadow teleport, and the Spear of Shar is a really pretty powerful weapon. I think turning back to Saloon, is it Saloon? Saloone? You know, that E's got a little mark above it. Faerun, you're hard to pronounce. Is more thematically rewarding, certainly. And so Shadowheart does go in her arc where you're not staying with Shar and you're turning to the light. Obviously, you have this big, powerful, cinematic, emotional redemption moment at the end of Act 2, where you're saving the Night Song and you're turning back the Shadow Curse. You get to do all this cool stuff. Again, like the first couple of times I played through until I did a Dark Urge run, that's what always happened. I thought that was how the game was programmed to work. I'm going to amend that my Dark Urge run was the most fun. Ending the game in Act 2 with the Gale sort of God Bomb in his chest when the Dread 3 are all in the same place, and the God Bomb there is really fun. The game specifically tells you this is an ending, but that's not the ending we designed for you, which I also thought was lovely. But yeah, like Shadowheart's redemption arc is moving in Act 2, and then you get to really sort of go on like a revenge tour, cleansing your palate sort of thing in Act 3 to complete that redemption arc. And so again, I think that healing journey is about like what she lost, what was taken away from her, and you're just like so righteously justified in then clearing out the cult and sort of ending that, taking out any piece of dark justiciar you might find and killing them all. And you know, it's very like when a lot of people deconstruct, they sort of go through that angry atheist phase. And I felt like part of the reason why I loved Lae'zel's storyline so much more than Shadowheart is because it's sort of, Shadowheart just sort of goes in the angry atheist phase. And again, reading some comments online and seeing how other people played the game, like there are people who found Shadowheart's devotion very like endearing and like solidifying for their own faith. And like, that's a wild read on the game. But like, hey, I was a Christian for a while. I understand my worldview has shifted a lot. So, you know, that's fine. That's fine. but yeah, I felt like Shadowheart's emotional journey really peaks in episode 2 or in act 2, and then act 3 is less so. Anything that sort of happens with her parents almost felt like less emotionally impactful at that point, just because like, yeah, at that point we're pretty committed to like Shar's the bad one. And I think the complexity of Shadowheart, follower of Shar, and Shar still being awful to her actually was more interesting. But again, because it's less a story of good and evil and more a nuanced story of like, yeah, there's complex layers here where even being righteous doesn't get her a good outcome. And so I found that personally to be more narratively fun. But Lae'zel is what I think is the best depiction of deconstruction and recovery actually can look like, and why I have a hard time not turning away from Vlaakith every single time and letting Lae'zel sort of develop that way. I think the character arc makes more sense, and I think there's a lot more depth. It's less, it's more rich regardless of how you play it. Whereas again, I think Shadowheart really depends on how you play it. Does it stay rich or does it sort of peak in Act 2? Where Lae'zel, I think, really man, she's got important story beats in Act 1, 2, and 3. And so I think it's really interesting sort of tracking that, where we get introduced to Orpheus, and she begins questioning, is Vlaakith, this god, who's also her people's leader, worth worshiping? And she starts questioning that. As she questions it, her relationships with you, the player character, or other people in the party continue to shift. And so again, I think there's that realistic component of deconstruction where she loses her community. She can't trust all the Gith. A bunch of Gith try and kill her, depending on the choices that you make in the game. And she bonds with the community, this sort of soft landing place she has. And so if she's a character you romance, which is what I did when I was Karlach, was like, let's have my two fighter badass characters partner up and be awesome. And then the most depressing ending in the game happens because they don't get to be together, even if you do everything right. What the hell, Larian? But as if you romance her, then as she questions her faith, she becomes more open to having a relationship with you and like actually relating to you instead of just sort of being this cold, calculating warrior. And so I thought there was a ton of like richness and depth there. And then like, do you side with the Emperor or do you save Orpheus to sort of complete her arc? And if you save Orpheus, again, Orpheus doesn't replace Vlaakith. It's not just, oh, one pope dies, here's the next pope. It's this figure, Vlaakith, was wrong and evil, has been abusing our people and harming them. And it's not just, I'm going to do a better job of being an authoritarian leader. Orpheus then sacrifices himself, again, depending on player choices, to be the thing that he hates, right? To turn into a geik, to become a mind flayer, if that's how you play it. Your character could also be a mind flayer. I've never done that. I've never done the full mind flayer route playthrough. The Emperor has always felt far too skeezy for me to trust. Maybe that's my own religious upbringing. I'm like, nah, you don't get to lie about everything and then be like, but it was for your own good. The so Orpheus then like gets freed, meets his purpose, and then also has to like directly change course and sacrifice himself, which gets a little Christian coded, I think. But that's just because Christianity really doesn't have a lot going for it in accuracy or any sort of meaning making beyond playing the victim so that you get to sacrifice yourself. An ethos built around your god dying doesn't give you a lot of outs. And then again, like Lae'zel becomes the person who's like, well, let's go rebuild Gith civilization. And so I think that piece, to me, as a religious trauma therapist, is the piece where I really do a lot of work, which is a lot of times people have already done their questioning. Maybe they've left, maybe they haven't when I start working with them. But rebuilding community and then figuring out like what is worth salvaging, right? Lae'zel doesn't go, ugh, I'm X Gith, I'm an A Gith. You know, like being an atheist is a weird label to carry around because you're defining yourself by what you are not, right? And I'm comfortable with like atheopagan as a label. I'm also comfortable with like secular humanist as a label, because again, that's more a definition of what I am rather than what I'm not. Somebody who's earth revering is a better fit for me than like I'm not theistic, because all that tells you is what you're not. And Lae'zel doesn't necessarily say I don't want to be Gith anymore. Lae'zel says like there's so much about Gith culture and society that is worth saving that we need to lead a revolution. The people are not the problem. The system and the leaders who took advantage of the system are the problem. And I think that's really like healthy. Whereas Shadowheart either takes over her cult or like destroys her cult, and that is maybe cathartic. Lae'zel's chapter ends, and then you have to go do more things. Which again, narratively, if you romance her, Karlach goes back to the Hells, and Lae'zel goes out into the astral plane, and like it's just devastating. Because like you did everything right, and then you're like, what about your little Gith egg? And like, yeah, he's a warrior now, but like it's very narratively unsatisfying because you don't get to see any of that or do any of that. So what a bummer. If I would have known, wouldn't have set my party up to be the most badasses get to partner off. And like Lae'zel's just a fantastic character to have at your party. The action surge, multiple attacks, jumping distance, a lot of cool things for Gith equipment, but also like playability. So battle master, etc. Like the fighter class is really, when you're learning how to play Baldur's Gate, Lae'zel's your best friend because like you need somebody who's going to do that damage. And so maybe I'm a little biased that Shadowheart misses for an entire act before she becomes useful. I understand on multiple playthroughs you reclass her right away. I get it. And I do like sort of the Death Cleric necromancy build a lot. I think it's really fun. But again, I played that as Shadowheart being evil. So Lae'zel, I think, goes through the biggest changes and also realistically lands in the healthiest place, even if she doesn't get a happy ending, right? And that's just sort of, there's different characters who are very polyamorous in the game, but like she's not one of them. And so it is sort of monogamous coded that like, oh, she doesn't get the happy ending because she doesn't get to like be monogamous with her lover from her trauma bonded adventure, right? Like I'm not necessarily saying that's a happy ending. I hear you. I love this game because there's so much nuance, and I think the replay value is so high because there's so much different nuance in what you can take from the game, what the characters can experience, those types of things. But I think Lae'zel is sort of the best actual like questioning. Shadowheart is like the Hollywood version of like big dramatic moments, light bulb moment, emotional set pieces, soaring soundtrack, big deal. And Lae'zel is, I think, the more realistic version of small doubt growing into bigger doubt, leading to breaking, sort of breaking down, questioning what it all means, and deciding like there's pieces that need to go and there's things to salvage, and sort of landing on a more, what I would describe as like a more holistic, healthy or spirituality, even though she's not inherently religious, because her society is set up around her leader is also a religious figure. It is. But again, it's sort of where I see people who are like, well, I'm not Christian anymore. What does that mean? Like, where are my ethics? And it's like, you have the same ethics you had when you're a Christian. You're just not giving the Bible the reason and the rationales for having those ethics. You have those ethics because those are your ethics. You support poor people, not because you read the Beatitudes too many times as a kid. You support poor people because you care about people in need. Your kindness to animals and marginalized communities, and root for the underdog because like that's your personal ethic, not because those are Christian ideas. And I'm like oversimplifying the work I do, right? Like that's not easy for me to just say and someone's like, thanks, Jeremy, that makes sense. It's all fixed now. Obviously, that's not how therapy works. It's certainly not how trauma is healed. But for the purposes of a video game that's a role playing and we're talking about religious trauma, I'm going to oversimplify. But yeah, I think Lae'zel is a far more interesting character in that sense, even though Shadowheart gets a lot more screen time. And arguably feels like the main character, having pretty big arcs in Acts 2 and Act 3. Although this is my fourth playthrough, and this is the first time where I've gotten the cutscene where she's scared of wolves, I had just always missed that. I never had her in the Grove. She's not a useful character early in the game because she misses all the time. You know? How many sacred flames can you miss before you're like, this character is not useful? Astarion, again, I can see sort of a framework, but that really feels a lot more like an abusive relationship than it does religious trauma specifically. I don't think Cazador's ever really sort of posited as a religious figure, certainly like a class elitist. There's a social class commentary that's available there, but not the main premise. It really is just an abusive relationship through and through. Which again can be really powerful. There are some things that I don't love about like the game beats, like Abladura. I don't remember what her name is. The drow in Act 1, Act 2. She's in Moonrise Towers, who gives you like a permanent buff if you make Astarion bite her. And like that feels really yucky, knowing he's like an abuse survivor and then sort of being abusive to him. And also, gameplay-wise, gives you a permanent buff for the rest of the game, which you just don't get that many of. Like Auntie Ethel's scalp piece, which has always grossed me out. But again, worth the buff. I don't like hair off the body. Like getting my own haircut, I donate it every time, and it kind of grosses me out. Somewhere in our house are my wife's extensions, and like every once in a while I'll come across them. And, I don't like hair. I don't like parts of the human body off of the human body, because I also don't like fingernails and toenails. And some stuff just elicit a real strong sensory response to me. How did I get there? What was I talking about? Anyway, Auntie Ethel's scalp. So yeah, I mean, there's other pieces, and again, like obviously the game is about occults. If you want sort of my take on the cults of the absolute and the Dread 3, that's in the other video, is sort of the character analysis, the character breakdown. Minthara is a really fun character. I think she's got some of the best like dialogue in the game, and I think playing as a drow gives you just a ton of unique gameplay as well. A lot of that in my playthroughs has been experienced as being shapeshifted. So I think if you could play Minthara in Act 1, I would feel far more inclined. The companions to recruit later in the game I've just spent less time with. I really, really wanted Minsk as a Wild's magic character to be interesting, but I didn't find the wild magic mechanic in Baldur's Gate 3 to be that compelling. It's a good idea. Again, one of our barbarian in my real life campaign has wild magic, and it is a pretty fun mechanic. In a real life campaign, I found it to be far more engaging and interesting than what it has been in the game itself. But Minthara, again, like as a paladin, having an oath, whether you keep your oath or your oath breaker, that certainly can be some religious trauma. I just haven't played as a paladin, although I've had Minthara as like a main party member and a romance interest in a playthrough, in an evil playthrough, which was pretty fun. But again, like Wolf and sort of being kicked out of her society and trauma she describes from her upbringing in Menzoberranzan, and it's a matriarchy, but like not a healthy one, is interesting. But again, I think a lot of that I just know because I read like all the Drizzt novels more than I was like, ooh, religious trauma. It's more of like class warfare and like an unhealthy society, and then like what it's like to be exiled, which can again happen with high control groups and cults. The religious trauma is that like community piece is important, but again, it feels less religious. It's not like she stepped on too many spiders and then became an apostate because of that. It's for other reasons. So I get that it's because she's followed that. Like I get there's religious component. It didn't elicit and sort of like light up that part of my brain that does like, ooh, religious trauma wasn't so present for Minthara's story, even though I thought she's a fun character to play with. So yeah. That's what I sort of have. None of the religions have purity culture, which bit of an oversight. All the characters are pretty thirsty and sex positive, which is not like a bad thing. Again, I'm also sex positive. I just think religious and a lot of the religious trauma that I work with is also tied to purity culture, body dysmorphia, body shame, shame about sex. So that's not really present in the game, but I do think that's a huge, huge component in coercive control and organized religion controlling people that the game really didn't get into, which is like fine, right? The game, it wasn't religious trauma 3, even though I think the themes and the writers and the people who made the game must have a lot of either lived experience or sort of external knowledge about the topic to have done the topic so well through several different characters. So go play with your fun little frog lady and do the gift storyline and feel very empowered in that. I think is great. I should do I'm just like, whenever I talk about it, I'm aware because as a nerd who's always been a nerd but stayed away from like World of Warcraft and stayed away from D&D for a long time, still never played World of Warcraft. Your D&D campaign is awesome and fascinating and not fun for anyone else to hear about it. It's like an inside joke. Like it's such a inside knowledge sort of thing that like I like talking about Baldur's Gate, but also there's only so much that you can do that on the internet that is interesting for other people. But also I think the community, at least for me, my experience of the online community around Baldur's Gate has been pretty good. Again, coming to the game about like 2 years after it had been out. And then also just the D&D community in general is like very, I'm oversimplifying, but like tends to be a lot of neurodivergent folks, a lot of queer folks. And like, it's just really lovely. And for all these different characters and all the different nuance and all the different ways that you can have different endings and resolution to different story arcs that are very much based in the human experience than set in a fantasy realm. There's just so much about the game itself, about D&D, about the community that I think is really lovely and has the potential to be really healing, which is great. And I love so much. So now I feel like going and start another playthrough, but I should probably finish the playthrough that I have. Should do a Will Origin playthrough. I want to do like 4 bards as a playthrough is also what I want to do. Maybe an evil bard, but to resist the dark urge. I don't know. I'm going to go play some Baldur's Gate. I'm lying to you, internet. I'm going to go pick my children up from school, but maybe I'll have time to play Baldur's Gate some night after they're in bed, because as a parent, that's when I get to video game. But you can go play, and that would be cool. If you want to hear me talk about other things, whether it's religious trauma or therapy in general, mental health in general, drop down in the comments and let me know. What do I have coming up? I'm sort of in between media bits. I'll probably watch the Peaky Blinders movie soon and have thoughts about why it was both unnecessary and I didn't like it, based on just not loving the way the show ended in season 6. But I haven't seen it and I've stayed away from spoilers. The Milwaukee Film Fest is coming up, so that's really what is going to be my media consumption. And I learned last year it's really hard to talk about film festival films on the internet because most people haven't seen them, because if they're on the film festival circuit, they're not out in mass consumption yet. But I do strongly believe in supporting local theater, and also Milwaukee's got a pretty great film festival, so I'm super stoked for that. If there's other things that you want to hear me talk about, drop down in the comments. Let me know. Like, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. Helps people find me and find my work. That's what I got. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.